Marvel Snap's upcoming robot-themed season looks insane. Coming on the heels of the Heralds of Galactus season, this robot season looks to drop in September, and there are some crazy cards in there. None of them, however, are crazier than Viv Vision. A 3/3 with an ability. At the end of turn, this card gives +1 to your hand. Your entire hand gets +1 power as long as you're winning her lane. But don't worry, if that's not happening, she'll just move to another location, and then at the end of turn next turn, you'll be able to try to repeat that stuff again. This is an absolute monster of a card. Just on its own, that is extremely powerful text that contains a wrinkle that I think not a lot of people have thought about. Now, I know people look at this and see, oh, I get it, it's Nakia, but repeatable. And I think that that is a very valid way to look at it. But you can also look at it in the context of, oh, I get it. This is a card that gets a buff from Fantasticar, and it's also Nakia buff, but repeatable. Oh, wait, Fantasticar goes with the High Evo package. Oh, wait, this is a repeatable buff that goes with Clea. Oh, wait, I can start stacking Clea stuff in the location that this is in repeatedly, and then I don't have to invest a ton of actual board slots in getting this repeated buff. I just get free power and then a bunch of big buffed cards for later in the game. Oh, wait, buff archetypes are already one of the strongest things to do in the entire game of Marvel Snap. Oh, wait, if I'm losing this card's location, it'll just Captain Marvel itself to another location. This card might be the strongest card I've ever seen in a Datamine. I think this card is an absolute house, an absolute monstrosity, an absolute queen among cards. I think it is one of the strongest cards that I have seen in literally ever. An absolute freak of nature. This is a terrifying card that absolutely threatens to consolidate the metagame around its own abilities if nothing is done about it. There are so many different things that this could potentially hook into. I view it as a sort of baseline good 3-drop. That's the floor for this, is that it's a copycat level, consistent player at 3. And the ceiling for this is that it is an Iron Patriot level. This is in 50% of decks cards. And I don't think they should be making cards that are on that level. Like, this is a Mr. Fantastic level card, a better than Mr. Fantastic level card. I want to be clear about this. This card on first read looks like the 10 to Mr. Fantastic First Steps is 8. This looks like the scariest thing they have ever tried to do in the buff archetype. It also hooks in to the stuff that is currently working in the Fantasticar archetype. It is also a copycat. I fail to see a world where this is not one of the most played cards in the game the second it comes out. I don't particularly understand why Moira X is in this season. She's not a robot, but I have read House of X and Powers of X, and she is sort of tied into some of the other cards that show up in this season. I will say this. This is one of the coolest top-down designs that I have ever seen on a Marvel Snap card. For those who are unfamiliar with what Moira X actually does, Moira X is a card that, or a character, I should say, who, the way her power set works is that when she dies, she goes back in time to her own body with all the knowledge that she gained during that timeline that she lived out. And this is used in various ways in the X-Men series in order to sort of set up the Krakoa arc, such that across various timeline, timey-wimey stuff that happens. The point I'm making is, this is an incredibly great top-down design because it A, requires Moira to die, and B, gives you the information from the start of the game. On the other hand, what this card does say effectively is, when I die, draw 3 cards. And yes, those 3 cards are cards you already had access to, which does sort of really put Marvel Snap's idea of card advantage in the crosshairs. The dev team has been very unwilling to make cards that draw cards. They're often willing to do things in different ways, but I think as Marvel Snap has matured, it has become clear that drawing a card in Marvel Snap is not really the same thing as drawing a card in another card game. In Hearthstone or Magic the Gathering, your cards are resources that can be spent to invalidate your opponent's resources. So if you have a deck full of cards that say kill a guy, and then a deck full of cards that say draw 3 cards, you're going to have the ability to kill more guys than your opponent can make. But that's not how Marvel Snap works. It's constrained both on spaces in terms of how many things you can put on the board, and on time in terms of games ending on turn 6, which means that there isn't really an attrition mechanic in this way. And so that makes the ability to draw 3 cards way less impactful if they are specifically cards you already have. Why? Because what drawing cards actually does in Marvel Snap is allow you to have consistency. What drawing your entire deck does means that you're always playing the best possible option at every single turn on the curve, and that is valuable. But when those cards are the cards you already have, they're not actually adding options, they're just adding volume, and that can be less valuable than it might otherwise look. In other words, I think this is an exciting card, but I also think that if you use traditional card game heuristics to evaluate it, you're going to come away with this is busted, and I don't think it is. This might be the card that I am the most scared for in the entire season. Now remember, I opened this video talking about how strong this whole season was. It's not just Viv Vision. Sparky is absolutely terrifying. This is a 2/3 with an activate ability that takes one of your cards that moved and moves it back, giving it +2 power. I think we all know where this is going. This is the Move Bounce Human Torch card. And while I do think that Move Bounce has been very efficiently, not necessarily dealt with, it's obviously still a good deck, but handled in such a way that it is no longer going to be a dominant deck, I think it has a baseline skill profile that I find troubling. And that is largely that because they seem to balance based on a larger slice of data, unless this deck is truly heinously, ruthlessly overpowered, it's not really going to get balanced at high infinite. And high infinite is where the best players are who are actually able to handle playing a deck that is this complex. I basically think that a deck like Move Bounce is very rarely going to be properly represented by looking at the sample size they seem to look at. And you can see the sort of opposite of this happening with nerfs to very easy decks like Surtur and Darkhawk, and I think that those are decks that probably should exist more, but because they are easier to play, end up taking a little bit too much damage from the nerf hammer. And I think that this is the opposite situation for that, where Move Bounce is a very hard deck to play. This is a very highly specific card. Like, it's just gonna do nothing if you're not using it right. And I worry that this card is a really scary thing to exist. There is, of course, one other issue here, and that is that I think this card, as far as I can tell, might be the card on the premium season pass, assuming they're still doing that 2 months from now. I think this is kind of the worst place to put a card that could be this impactful to the high infinite metagame, because what you're going to do is generate a lot of hype about the card from people who are generally high investment players, who are very good at the game, who play a lot, and then people are going to go buy it, and because they're not as good, it's not going to be as good for them. It's a no-win situation for basically everybody. My view on what season pass cards like that should be is basically that they shouldn't be, but if they are going to be, they should be purchasable with gold or in some other form. But at the very least, I think they got the profile of a card that could be in the Season Pass SPSP or whatever we're going to call it, Super Premium Season Pass, correct-ish with Fantasticar, which is to say, this is a card that tells you what it is and what it does, and everyone can play it pretty simply, and it's not particularly overly busted. It's just, like, pretty good. And, yeah, that's sort of where I'm at with that. That's fine. This is a card that is either going to be really, really obscenely powerful or totally forgettable, and neither of those is what you want in that, in as much as you want anything in that. So this card scares me for like 4 different reasons, and the gameplay is the primary one, but the fact that it just seems like it's going to create a bunch of terrible incentives for high infinite players and for content creators is definitely another one. Bastion is really interesting. A 4/5 that has an on reveal that, and this is another great top-down flavor thing, He turns your cards into sentinels. Get it? He makes them into 2/3s. Wherever he's played, he sends those cards to hand, copies of those cards, and he makes them 2/3s. And I think that's like a very good top-down mechanic. But as far as the card goes, this is a Victoria Hand Hood card, very clearly to me. It probably isn't the best of the Victoria Hand Hood cards. It's below the sort of Misery Hood V-Hand Frigga tier, but I think it's right in that next tier, and those are largely the core cards, so this could be maybe the last of the core cards for a deck like that, or maybe the first of the flex cards for a deck like that. That's sort of the range that I see this card landing in. I do think it's particularly sensitive to power and cost, though. I think if this card costs 5, it's like basically 100% unplayable, and it was datamined at 5 at some point, I believe. I might just be misremembering. I also think that if this card had less power, it's getting really close to unplayable. It just ends up not being worth committing to. One of the things that like the Hood Misery stuff has going for it is that all of it has decent bodies, and the upside is like much more significant. Obviously, the Hood's body is not decent, but he sort of pays you back by giving you the demon anyway. And that ends up being more than worth it, even if you're not getting rid of him, even though you always are getting rid of him. And so you have this guy who is good, but I also think that we're going to get to a point where it's going to be hard to balance having space to put more cards in hand in a deck like this, which I think is weird, but the more cards that add 2 cards to your hand, the less space you're going to have, and this guy is mostly going to be adding 2 cards, I think. You're never really looking to add 3 with this, like, it's probably not a realistic thing. Your goal is to, like, get another Hood, get another Victoria hand, and enabling the infinite Victoria hand works is really what this card is doing. You have this, okay, check it out. You have Victoria hand into Frigga. You play this on the V-hand Frigga lane. Then you play, you know, V-hand and Frigga again. And then you just have 10 million infinitely large Victoria hands on the final turn. That seems like the kind of thing that you're going to be wanting to do with this card. I really don't know if he goes anywhere else. Like, it's kind of just that, and then maybe like a fringy Iron Man thing if you can cheat it out, but that doesn't seem realistic to me. This guy is a Victoria hand bot. I don't know if the riff on Claw here is intentional, but it's kind of a sick riff. I also think that this is just like the closest an Activate card has gotten to being like, you know, there's not really like a white tiger for Activate or a claw for Activates, and I think this is the space that it's looking to fill. But like when you look at this, it's like, oh, that's a 4/10. Like that's just a 4/10 with an Activate ability. It's just all the powers in the 4/10 in the Activate ability. So there's some really interesting stuff that can be done here, and I think it's important to talk about what Karima Shapandar can do in the context of another card releasing this season, Jocasta. Because I think it seems pretty clear to me that they're trying to give this card options. Now, Jocasta is a 3/3 with an Activate that uses all the other Activates at her location without using up the Activates. She's the Activate Lord, to use other card game terminology. This is the card that rewards you for putting a bunch of Activates in your deck. You have your Karima Shapandar, you have your Scarlet Spider, you play Jocasta, you activate Jocasta, suddenly you're getting, like, it's turn 5, you get a Karima proc, you get a Scarlet Spider proc, you get to activate them again. That's the kind of thing that Activates have been waiting for, to actually have a deck and an identity unto themselves. And I think that this is the card that, to me, the previous card, Karima Shapandar, and the next card we're going to talk about, Awesome Andy, have to be evaluated in the context of. This is going to change what Activates are in Marvel Snap forever. And it is actually just astonishing that there are so many cards that are so crazy in this season that this is like third on my list of crazy cards in this season, behind both Viv Vision and Sparky. This is a nutty card that will change Marvel Snap forever. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind about that. One of the really interesting things about Activates is that it's sort of hard to get a read on how good they actually are, because every Activate effectively doesn't have text on turn 6, which, by the way, is kind of a problem Jocasta is solving, because if you play them in the Jocasta lane and then activate Jocasta on 6, they will have that text. So it is sort of interesting that that does work, but with all of that said, Awesome Andy, if you look at just the rate, is like a pretty good rate card. Oh, that's a 2/1 activate, it's a 2/5. You play it with Jocasta, it's a 2/9. That's pretty sick. We're very interested in good numbers. That's good numbers. But it's sort of hard for me to tell how good this stuff can possibly be, because so much of our experience with activates is like, they're fine. This is basically one of Herbie's modes at a lower rate. I don't really think we're going to be doing a lot of that. It's a fine thing to have in the game, but this does not seem like a card you should be going out of your way to get. Maybe you're building the Jocasta deck and you want it. I don't know, but this seems a little middling. Jim Hammond is a Hope Summers card if I've ever seen one. Scaling off of bonus energy, I think, is a sort of dangerous place to put any card, right? Because by definition, that sort of means it scales off of the amount that you're snowballing. So it sort of means that this is going to be perhaps a win more card, i.e. you're probably winning the games where you have a bunch of energy and you're like doing Hope Summers Wiccan stuff, and that's, you know, it's probably fine, right? You're probably already winning those. But I do think that he is in a solid spot as far as one-cost cards go. That said, I think him costing 1 is a weakness in terms of what this card could have been. I would feel much more comfortable putting this card in my decks if it was a 2 with slightly larger scaling, in large part because the number that this guy gets matters, and in large part because of Killmonger. One of the reasons why it's so hard to make one-drop scalers, especially one-drop scalers that sit on the board, like Nicholas Scratch or the upcoming Mad Thinker, for example, they are cards that are extremely vulnerable to Killmonger and Shadow King, but also by virtue of being one cost, the numbers that they are as designers allowed to put on a one cost card are just going to be less than the numbers they are allowed to put on a 2 cost card, which makes it much harder for a 1 cost card to ever be worth building around. Because not only do they have to be constrained in terms of what they are weak to, they are obviously weak to cards like Killmonger and Shadow King, they are constrained in terms of what they are allowed to scale to. And there are very few exceptions to this. The only really notable one I could think of is probably Human Torch, who has the text double on him. And I think, you know, maybe if Jim Hammond says, if you have bonus energy, double my power, then we're talking about maybe a real card that is going to force people to play Killmonger and Shadow King. But as is, I just don't know if this guy is going to make it to what they want to, like, it seems like they're trying to use this guy as like an archetype signpost, like build around me. But you can't do that very easily with ones. It's really hard to make a 1-drop archetype signpost, like Nick Scratch or whatever. That doesn't work. It can't be the main thing because it is a 1-cost card, because the fact that it's a 1-cost card means that you have to limit how big it can get. It can't be the thing that wins you lanes. And that's sort of what Jim Hammond looks like to me. It's just like, oh, well, I mean, I can play this in a deck that's already doing this stuff, but if I try specifically to build around him, he's not going to give me enough payoff to building around him that I wouldn't get from just like playing normal cards that cost 1, you know? Like if I'm going to put a Wiccan deck together and I'm going to give up on Quicksilver, I need a payoff. I need a payoff for that. I need a payoff for like A, making my Wiccan less consistent, but also B, like losing the ability to run a bunch of awesome 2-drops, and 2-drops are dope right now. I don't think Jim Hammond is enough of one. Do y'all like She-Not decks? Or even just Moon Girl She-Hulk decks? Really just anything involving She-Hulk. This is this She-Hulkest card that's ever come out. Do y'all want to play some She-Hulk Sunspot? Do y'all want to skip some energy? If y'all want to skip some energy, let me hear you say, hell yeah. That's what this card does. This is the skip energy build around, and because it is a more expensive card, they are able to put meaningful payoffs onto it. Skipping energy like this is already a fairly viable strategy in Marvel Snap. Full skips are not common outside of Moon Girl decks. The real downside, though, is I think that the day this card comes out, there's probably going to be a pretty astonishing amount of Mobius running around, which will instantly make this card unplayable. And I feel like they keep running into this wall where they make a really cool thing and then it dies to a card that came out in like 2023. And I kind of think that like that's what this card is, because this card is awesome. It's sick. It's nasty. If you skip and you don't get a She-Hulk discount and you don't get your Warlock activate because your opponent played a Mobius on turn 5, buddy, you have lost that game. It is the most over it has ever been. And I am afraid that that is the world we're going to live in when this card comes out. Is just going to be, everyone's going to make some Moon Girl She-Hulk decks and get absolutely clapped by the sickos who are Mobiusing those Moon Girl She-Hulk decks. Danger looks a lot like the thing first steps, but has a couple of significant advantages and one major disadvantage. The significant advantage here is that Danger costs 4, which means that this is a card that can go in your Zabu pile. If you are playing a Zabu, Surge, Mr. Fantastic deck, this is a very interesting card because you get some buffs onto it, you get it cheaper, and suddenly you're not really worried about the rate that it's at. At 4-6, it's not great rate, but at 3-7, it's kind of goated. That's just a really strong card. That's 7 power plus some other amount of power on that activate. Just pretty damn good. Downside, totally medium when you play it later in the game. Just not really all that worth investing in. And if you are playing this, wouldn't you rather be playing a Scarlet Spider some of the time? I kind of think that that's probably the most coherent argument against it is, oh, Scarlet Spider, that's interesting. But, I mean, this feeds a Fenris Wolf, it feeds a Death. We've seen these sort of soft death decks be around before. I do think that there is hope for this card, and of course, if you double it up with Jocasta, it might be the most disgusting thing anyone has ever done in the entire history of doing things. Just 2 booms on the same lane feels really, really impossible to beat late in the game. Last up in the season is Super Adaptoid, and I don't like that they did a lot of things with this card. First of all, this is a tech card. Why is it a 3-5? Why are they making a 3-5 tech card now? What the hell? Second of all, this feels like the season they want Activate to shine. Why would you make a card that shuts down the Activate mechanic in the season of Activate? I get the idea of needing a release valve, but this feels like it feels like the release valve is at like an 8, whereas the activates in this season are like from a 4 to an 8. You know what I mean? Like there are some pretty okay activates in this season, but none of them are like 3-5 upside, you know? That's just not really a thing there in the bit. Like if Jocasta was a 3-5, I feel like I'd feel a lot cooler about this, but it's not. And so I worry that this might create a situation where like we have, okay, activate decks are really good. This guy drops and they just instantly disappear. 3-5 is crazy for a tech card. That's just really my fundamental takeaway here. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I've been KMBest. You've been phenomenal. Let me know what you thought about the robot season and my takes on it. And let me know what your takes are on it. I will see you in the next one. You have a wonderful day.